Morning, everyone. I see people are still joining the meeting. Um, but yeah, we'll get started. Sorry for having you guys wait for some time. But anyway, I'd just like to welcome everyone to this dialogue. Thank you all for joining. My name is Tebogo Lekubu from the Southern African Liaison Office, and I would like to welcome you all to today's virtual multi-stakeholder dialogue on the crisis in Swaziland. You should see somewhere on your screen that this meeting is being.
Sorry, I can't hear Tebogo. I'm not sure if that's my side.
Yeah, you muted, Chair.
Okay, you have lost sound. I will take over from you. Okay, we're going to have to try and get Tebogo back. Do you want to disconnect and reconnect? Sorry about that, everyone. We've had a number of technical difficulties, but as it is an important meeting, we're going to try and power through. So just some notes. Firstly, this meeting is being recorded and it's being live streamed on Facebook. And thank you to those who are joining us via the Facebook live stream. And thank you to those who are joining us on Zoom. It's a public meeting. Yeah, some of our colleagues and comrades in Swaziland who are joining us have also had a bit of technical difficulties, but will hopefully be coming into the meeting too. Do you want to see if you're connected, Tebogo?
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Okay. Yes.
Sorry about that. Don't know what's going on today, but yeah, it's been a bit of a difficult one. But anyway, as I was saying, you should see somewhere on your screen that today's meeting is being recorded and live streaming. I just want to make sure that you can still hear me. We're still good. All right, cool. Today's meeting is public, and as always, if you have any questions about this meeting, feel free to send an email to info@salo. I'll also put the email address in the chat. Today's dialogue will look at the current political situation and human rights situation in Swaziland. Africa's last absolute monarchy is facing significant unrest, particularly in the wake of ongoing calls for democratic reform. The recent week of rage protests reflect growing dissatisfaction among citizens seeking greater political freedoms and human rights protections. However, these movements have been met with violent crackdowns, raising urgent concerns about the safety of human rights defenders, civic space, and the region's stability. So this multi-stakeholder dialogue aims to foster regional advocacy for stability, enhance support for human rights advocacy, and promote regional solidarity and cooperation. We have a lovely panel of speakers today. Hopefully they'll be able to join. As we said, we've been experiencing some technical difficulties. But we have Mr. Mlungisi Makanya, who is the president of PEDEMO, Gabby Ndukuya, who's the president of the Swaziland National Union of Students, or SNAS, Rebone Tao, who will be speaking today as an independent analyst, and then possibly we will have a contribution from Piers Pegu from the Institute for Security Studies. Today's session will be chaired by my colleague Lily Menoim. She's SALO's dialogues coordinator, and we appreciate her excellent work in organizing these dialogues, these sessions, and for steering today's meeting, and for covering for me during my technical difficulties. Following the addresses from today's speakers, the floor will be open for discussion, and that is your invitation to please give inputs or ask any questions that you may have. Please use the raise hand function, and our chair will acknowledge you, and you can also contribute in the chats. In the meantime, please keep yourselves muted. And then, yeah, I think that's about it from me. Without wasting too much time, and on behalf of SALO, and in collaboration with the Norwegian People's Aid, I would like to thank everyone here for joining us today. Over to you, Lily.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tebogo. I would like to please call on our first speaker, Rebone Tao, who is a political analyst, to give us some input into today's discussion.
Good morning to everyone. And thanks to SALO for facilitating this meeting today. I'm going to have my video switched off through my presentation. And yeah, hope that's okay with everyone. Thank you. And thanks to all the participants who were able to attend also. Good morning, everyone. I think these are very interesting, times in Eswatini, things that in the past we could not see happening. And the reason why I'm saying that, I wanted to start about the recent developments more around the police officers who are to march in parliament, and deliver a petition, and I mean, they held a meeting and a few days ago, and the National Commissioner of Police, was instructed to actually get names of these police officers, who are seen now to be problematic by the regime, and which in my view, this is very progressive to see that now those who historically were seen to be arresting activists, human rights activists, are now starting to see the light, and also this is also around the issue of salary increment, that they are also demanding in Eswatini, because there are serious challenges. You've got also the University of Eswatini, which is not being able to pay its staff members, while we see the king, traveling and living this opulence lifestyle. We know that of recent, we saw when he traveled with his wife to be the daughter of the former president of South Africa to Europe, But while his country faces serious challenges in terms of the economy and the challenges, as I've said, you've got the University of Eswatini, which is not able to pay staff members. Now you have police who are coming out to the streets, who are saying that also they have concerns regarding their salaries and so forth. But I think also what is more interesting of recent, there was a report that was released, a few days ago. It was covered by a couple of newspapers, EWN, and this was Amabungane report, about the money laundering that is happening, in Eswatini. And it's linking one of the king's son-in-laws, who is at the center of this money laundering. It says that, just quoting the EWN article, where how Swaziland is becoming a haven of money laundering, and this is a serious, I think, concern, within the SADC region, and they're saying that this money is laundered from South Africa, going via Eswatini to Dubai, and it's linked to also the gold. And we know that at some point, sometime last year, Al Jazeera also ran a documentary regarding the gold that's leaving Zimbabwe. So it should be of great concern, this money illicit flows that we're seeing in the region. And I think that we need leadership within SADC that really can be proactive, but also us as citizens, being proactive, to stop some of this money laundering shenanigans that are happening and that are becoming rife, in the region, over the few years we've been seeing certain monies that are moving around. I mean, we've seen the AU report, which was published years back, which was the AU had commissioned former President Thabo Mbeki, to look into the money laundering that is happening in the African continent. And I mean, that report shows how much money is leaving the African continent. But what we see, people in the African continent living in poverty, where there's also issues of lack of service delivery, because this money that's been stolen, I mean, should be delivering services to the people of Eswatini, or individual countries, So things are very interesting in Eswatini, and I think we need also a SADC that, as I'm saying, that the leadership where there's political will, but obviously we have seen that there's not much political will within SADC. We've seen also of recent, they called a special SADC summit to deal with we thought that we'll have a communique that's out, that really speaks hard on the human rights violations, for example, in Mozambique, and we have not seen that, and this is worrying because SADC continues to be a boys' club, and not condemn any human rights violations, whether in Eswatini or whether in any country within the region, and well, while there is this dynamics within the region in terms of political shift. We saw with Botswana of recent, they've just had elections and a new party BNF is now through the umbrella UCD. UCD has taken over the country from BDP, and but also what was very interesting, this first state visit of the president of Botswana also was in Zimbabwe, and was the only head of state that attended the what I think was the Child International Day event that took place in Zimbabwe. So we needed to make sure that there's also serious lobbying, within SADC, especially where there's a serious political shift by whether Swazi activists, but also those who are in solidarity with Eswatini, to strengthen those relations from a civil society perspective with different role players in different countries, to try and also raise awareness, especially when we look at this political shift on what is happening in Eswatini, because it can't continue that in 2024 you still have an absolute monarchy in the region, and you still have human rights violations, and with this element of the police now, this is also something that should be raised, within the region, that to show that the police now are woke, and spread the message, to fellow activists, to as they engage or lobby governments, to show that the system now is also that brutal, that even those who are raising concerns from the security sector are now also targeted, so that the people can see how brutal is the system. I think I will end there for now, and then we'll continue to engage, with discussions as we move forward.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that was a lot of really helpful things for us to start to think about. So thank you for setting the scene for the conversation in that way. So I think some of our speakers from Swaziland are still struggling to connect. So perhaps what I'd like to do is before we go into more detail about what is happening on the ground in Swaziland, I think we would like to ask Piers Pigot from the Institute of Security Studies if you would be able to come in and give us some kind of more of a regional analysis of how what's happening in Swaziland, a bit of the bigger picture effects of it, if that would be okay with you. And yes, we have maybe put you on the spot a bit, and so no worries about not being particularly prepared, but we'd just like to hear from you. Thank you.
Okay, Lily, thanks very much, and thanks to the colleagues at SALO, and greetings to those online. As Lily's pointed out, I have not prepared anything on Swaziland, but I think it's important to locate any discussion about what's taking place and what may take place in terms of pushing, lobbying, advocacy, activism for a change in the political system and the political economy of Swaziland, to look at that within the broader context of shifts and dynamics in Southern Africa. We are all very conscious of some of the political movements that are taking place in the region through the lens of electoral democracy. We have seen movements in a number of countries in the region which have seen pressure being placed on a number of long-term incumbent political dispensations. These have generally been associated with liberation movements, and while there's a very uneven footprint, we are seeing shifts in terms of movements towards pluralism, but also actions against pluralist and democratic activities and outcomes. So we have some live situations, as you're very well aware. This platform profiles those in relation to the situation in Mozambique. We've had the recent outcome of the shift in political power in Botswana. We have election results being counted as we speak in Namibia, where SWAPO faces a very serious prospect of erosion of its majority in parliament, or potentially losing the presidential vote as well. Hopefully we'll get some greater clarity on that later today or tomorrow. And then, of course, we have other elections happening in the region as they relate to quite febrile politics in Malawi next year, towards the end of next year, and in Tanzania as well, where we're likely to see a ruling party that's been in power since the 1960s, pushing back hard against opposition elements. And so we see these trends of a loosening of democrat and a movement towards greater pluralism and the embracing of opposition politics in certain areas, coalition politics, as we see in a place like South Africa. And then those entities, and there are 4 liberation movements in the region, which have kind of got their heels dug in, and we see that with Frelimo at the moment. ZANU-PF, this platform is very familiar with the dynamics in Zimbabwe. Angola, which doesn't get much of our attention, unfortunately, which is another serious issue in terms of MPLA incumbency and what that's meant for opposition politics in those spaces. And as we said in Tanzania next year, where Chama Mapinduzi are likely to retain their position in power by hook or by crook, and as we've seen in some other places, manipulating the electoral playing field to their advantage. So within that context, you have this outlier of an absolute monarchy, which SADC effectively dances around in terms of its democratic commitments, and we saw that in the elections last year, where my understanding was that the advice of SIAC, the Electoral Advisory Council, had been for them to for SADC not to monitor the elections, simply because, I mean, Swaziland is just so off the radar when it comes to SADC's democratic guidelines, that it's very difficult to put anything coherent and sensible on the table in terms of reporting, beyond the never-ending recommendations for electoral reform, which simply are not listened to in that space. And we saw the election report from SIOM coming out of the Swazi elections last year, which were effectively a damp squib, and I think extremely even more disappointing, considering there had been some hope that the Zimbabwean election reporting was indicating a shift towards more robust engagement on assessing electoral democracy, not just in terms of the process around elections, but the conditions on the ground. This was, as we've said in previous meetings, an outcome from a quite robust programming within SADC to develop its electoral capacities. This was part of a broader set of areas that the EU were funding, and you can imagine how that's gone down in certain circles in SADC, where the EU will be labeled as promoting some kind of agenda within the SADC governance framework. That's not stated as official public positions of leadership, but we know that those kinds of narratives are circulating within a broader set of narratives around regime change and so forth, which we've seen being thrown against the opposition in Mozambique. I'd be interested to hear from Swazi colleagues whether something similar is being pushed by any of the elements in the Eswatini government or in the monarchy there, that this is some kind of foreign-funded agenda in terms of the push against or the push for democratic reform. Now, we know earlier this year in August, the and this is an interesting time because SADC is also going through a process of trying to re-energize its engagement with non-state actors and with civil society. It is encouraging the establishment of what are called SNCs. These are SADC national committees, which are provided for in the SADC Treaty. And these are meant to be committees in each of the SADC member states, usually convened by foreign affairs or so forth, which engage with civil society actors and other interest groups as well. So this is private sector, professional associations, and so forth, on SADC-related issues and SADC agendas. Now, in a number of countries, these were established, and I don't think that they were ever established in Swaziland. Again, it would be interesting to hear from Swazi colleagues whether there has been any move to develop an SNC in Swaziland, and if there has, what that looks like, because in some countries these were quite perfunctory and were also set up as a way of glossing over a notion of civil society, participatory processes and so forth, going through the motions, but quite clearly looking at the content and output of what those SNCs did. This was not, these were not serious serious developments at all, and we're not really going to shift or move forward the policy agenda. In fact, they seem more of a space for containing agendas more than anything else. So that process is afoot. The efforts to develop the coordinating and interactive mechanisms within SADC itself as a secretariat with civil society, they've also taken, there's been some movement on that. Efforts are underway to establish a think tank network which would be connected to SADC. But the actual mechanism within SADC, which there had been some hope that at the last summit in August, there would be some endorsement of that. There wasn't. It was kind of thrown back by summit, back to the Secretariat for greater consultation. Now, some people see this as a reflection of the politics within SADC, where a less progressive element now commands and chairs the two troikas, Zimbabwe as chair of the summit, and Tanzania as chair of the organ. That the kind of reinvigoration of civil society interaction was something that they were much more cautious about. I think that's inevitable in the wider context that we operate in, and the fact that there has kind of traditionally been a hesitancy about engaging with a wider bandwidth of civil society beyond some sort of favored parties who often are just operate under the rubric of constructive engagement and don't play a more constructively critical role in terms of pushing SADC around reform. But it's important not to forget that we're dealing here with an intergovernmental body and not a supranational body. So its ability to intervene is contingent on whether there is a serious regional security stability threat, or indeed the host country is inviting you in. And in the Swazi case, of course, we know that the monarchy, the government, was resistant to SADC engagement, was pushing back against that. And in August, during the same summit, Swaziland was taken off the SADC Secretariat agenda. Now, to a certain extent, that was always going to happen if, or that was the agenda, the objective of the Eswatini authorities. What's critical in this space, and I think this is something which relates to every country that we're dealing with, is to be able to find how do we navigate the SADC ecosystem to make sure that narratives, data, evidence is put in front of relevant SADC bodies that can then filter up through the Council of Ministers into the organ and so forth. I think we saw recently, there was a lot of hope in the last SADC meeting in Harare, which focused very much on the DRC story. but there was a hope in some quarters that SADC would say something progressive and do something progressive about the Mozambican situation. What was clear was that Mozambican civil society and opposition areas did not access SADC and the Secretariat in order to put their case forward. Now, that is a reflection of their own limitations in some respects, but it's also a reflection of an institution that does not readily open its doors to alternative narratives of that nature. But I do think that this is a space which is ripe for lobbying, advocacy, and for locking down a very clear mapping of where civil society groups, opposition would be able to make sure that its versions, its data, its evidence is put in front of relevant bodies inside political and technical bodies, subcommittees on security and so forth inside the Secretariat. And I think that's something that in terms of strategies and related tactics is something that needs to be looked at in terms of the implementation phase. I think it's quite clear
if you don't mind, I think that's a good place. If you would like to wrap up, you can, but thank you. Do you want to say a few more?
Just a couple of words and then I'll stop, Lily. Thanks.
Okay.
I think this provides a really important opportunity to develop a platform for developing a strategy for engaging SADC. And even though I know a lot of people will be rolling their eyes at the prospect of having to engage SADC, and it's not exclusively about SADC, think about that, and also think about a parallel set of advocacy and lobbying activities with key SADC member states in order to make sure that what's going on in Eswatini is clear in the minds of others, because I can assure you that the image, or I should say the insights into the developments, political and economic, in Eswatini are not very well known at all and do not have a good profile in the region or beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful and much appreciated. Yeah, on that note, the president of Pudemo, Mlungisi Makanya, is here, and we would like to call you in, please, President Makanya, to explain to us your insights of the crisis in Swaziland.
Thank you very much, Lily, and I want to start by apologizing for joining late. I had sent Lily a message that I had to go and find an alternative place because we had a power challenge here. The transformer got stolen overnight, so we do not have energy. I think the issue of Eswatini is not new to many, if not all, the participants in this dialogue. But we have been asked to come and share with you what has been the latest developments. Now, the latest developments, one could say that obviously following the unfortunate decision by SADC to remove Swaziland from the Troika agenda, the monarchy got strengthened in an unprecedented way. A decision that for us was quite disappointing because we invested time trying to engage and impress on SADC on the things that we believe needs to happen in Swaziland. And unfortunately, none of those things ever took place. And SADC simply said, well, because the king is saying things relatively stabilized, Swaziland has just concluded a peaceful elections that had an impressive turnout. And it doesn't think that the need for SADC's intervention or even facilitation for dialogue still exists, because he had convened Sibaya and Swazis had an opportunity to express themselves. Of course, one cannot shy away that there were some unfortunate incidences within what I would loosely call the progressive front, in the sense that some of the organizations that we had sort of agreed with, and they were party to the collective 5 points plan that we drafted and presented to SADC, that we felt very strongly that should guide the way forward in terms of how a peaceful, meaningful, respectful engagement ought to unfold, decided to be hoodwinked by the regime's propaganda and urge people to participate in the last elections, which was quite a setback, because from 2021 moving forward, we had, to a very large degree, succeeded in winning a huge chunk of the Swazi populace away from being dazed by royal propaganda into the belief that there is a need for fundamental political change in Swaziland. So it is a fact that indeed the numbers of people who participated in the elections were quite huge. And with hindsight, we are seeing even those who were proponents of participation admitting and acknowledging that that was a grave mistake. But we also do not believe, as Pudemo, that that mere participation, which to a very large degree was accompanied by coercion, should have persuaded SADC to completely shut the door from the issues that we have been raising. But what has happened since the last election is that we've seen and we are witnessing an accelerated economic mortgage of the country with the facilitation of the king and his government to private sector interest that is in the main foreign, with very few domestic elements here and there, where we are witnessing a deliberate collapse of public service in favor of privatization. And this manifests in the area of health care, education, and other social services that are in unprecedented state of collapse. That is unfolding parallel with an increase of private sector entry into spaces that were historically almost an exclusive participation of the state. Now, what does this mean for the ordinary Swazi? It means that we are witnessing what we in Pudemo characterize as the third wave of the proletarization of the native Swazi, where there is an increase in the huge number of Swazis who find themselves living in extreme poverty and squalor, while simultaneously we are seeing an increase in the number of the elites' accumulation and participation in the economic sphere as the local representative of the foreign interests that we are witnessing mortgage the country. What we find quite disturbingly painful about SADC is that it is a fact that SADC does not have an open and welcoming attitude to civil society or non-state players when they attempt to engage with SADC and raise their issues. Even the issues that we were able to raise with SADC that saw Swaziland included in the Troika agenda, it was not at the invite of SADC. We literally had to kick doors. We literally had to rely on countries such as South Africa, which have got a more listening and empathetic ear to civil society views. So whenever we were afforded an opportunity to come and make a representation to SADC delegations, there was disproportionate time allocation to civil society groups compared to the time that is allocated to the state and its selected civil society formations. Because what we experienced was that there was been feeling by the state of so-called civil society formations to a point that those that fell under the multi-stakeholder forum were reduced to a combined time of about an hour, 30 minutes on a 2-day consultation process. And most of the time went to state and other state-appointed so-called civil society players. So while we were optimistic, but we knew at the back of our minds that there wasn't much really that we can expect. If there's anything that come of it, we'll be pleasantly surprised. Now, the other question that was raised was that what we think that spaces such as this one and SADC can do in assisting human rights defenders in Swaziland and other civil society actors who, I must hasten to say, are under extreme pressure and targeting. Many of you here would know that just towards the end of September, I fortunately survived an attempted assassination through poison, which was the 4th attempt to eliminate me in a space of 2 years, because the first attempt was in 2022. But my case may be high profile because I occupy the position of president of Pudem. But the lived reality is that there are a lot of Swazis who on a daily basis witness strong state intimidation, and some of them have been forced to leave the country into exile. Our Deputy Secretary General, who was the only remaining litigant inside Swaziland on our challenge on the Suppression of Terrorism Act, has had to flee the country and seek asylum in some country in the European Union. But also I know of a lot of activists, ordinary activists, who have had to leave their homesteads and seek refuge in some parts of the country as a result of increased state repression. So in a nutshell, what one can say is that the removal of Swaziland from the agenda has emboldened the king also to make sure that he finishes off whatever is remaining of resistance and opposition. And we will continue to appeal in such for spaces for increased solidarity with the people of Swaziland. But one may want to end by saying that, because I know in this group, many of you do have the ears of your respective governments and some of these regional bodies. The attitude of SADC of not wanting to take seriously and pay attention to the challenges of the region are going to affect even those states that may think that they are not directly involved in the local disputes. I mean, if you look at what is happening in Mozambique, for instance, there is no saying in emphasizing this point that it has huge economic consequences for countries such as South Africa and other countries that are trading with Mozambique. And we would want to appeal to those countries to take a more proactive role as opposed to a reactive role in trying to make sure that all countries within SADC, they do comply with the respective statutes and treaties of SADC. Thank you very much, facilitator.
Thank you so much, President Makanya. We really appreciate having you here, and we are glad to know you are safe, and I think you've really made some important points about just how very severe the situation is, and how we really can't accept it to be removed from the regional or SADC agenda at all. So now I'd like to call in for some civil society perspective. If we could ask Thabo Masuku to come in from the Foundation for Social and Economic Justice. If you could talk about the updates on the NGO bill and about the human rights situation in Swaziland. Let me just enable you to unmute. Yes, Thabo Masoko, if you could please give us a few words.
Morning, colleagues. Morning, Lily and other colleagues present here. All protocol observed. Of course, we are really grateful as the foundation for this opportunity. Definitely, the president has highlighted some of the challenges that are also spin-offs from the political challenges that the country is facing. But of course, also as civil society organizations, we have faced a lot of pushback from the government in terms of victimization of civil society and targeting of some civil society organizations and even individual representatives and leaders of civil society. We have seen situations where the space for operation for civil society is severely curtailed and closed. We can hardly conduct activities in communities because of the situation that the government has put stringent conditions for us to be able to freely conduct activities in communities. That is also coupled now with the NGO bill, which in its current form we have vehemently rejected as civil society organizations, where we have met with the Minister of Home Affairs, which is the proponent of this bill, and we have made presentations where we have vehemently opposed this bill. To say in its current form, it is really, rendering civil society organizations useless and irrelevant. In fact, non-existent. The space is non-existent. It will be impossible to have civil society organizations proper that are able to be critical, that are able to hold the government accountable, being able to exist after passing of this bill as it is in its current form. And also the fact that the absence of dialogue, even dialogue between government and civil society, is really creating an environment where there is a lot of finger pointing between civil society and government, and we get into platforms like SADC, get to platforms like AU, platforms like like UN. That's where we are able to meet with government, where we are already pointing fingers towards each other, but we are not able to meet at a local level and discuss the challenges that civil society is facing and the possible solutions to those challenges that we are facing as a country and as civil society at large. But also, I think what is really, painful is the fact that the issue of, the successful appeal and, reinstallation of the Suppression of Terrorism Act as its original form, its original version, was really a setback on the issue of freedoms of association, freedoms of assembly, and curtailing all the freedoms that we as civil society are supposed to enjoy as per the same constitution that was passed in 2005. But now we are not able to even enjoy those freedoms as the people of Swaziland, but also as civil society organizations. Our role is to ensure that we hold government accountable, is to ensure that we hold duty bearers at local level accountable, and they are able to, uphold the values of basic freedoms, which we are failing to see in the current situation, where the duty bearers at local level are now acting as agents of security for the state in the communities, and are refusing space for civil society organizations to engage with communities, to engage with them at that level, but also to find solutions to human rights violations that we are facing at local level. So this is making really the work of civil society organizations very difficult. Hence, we have seen also a large shift from, a lot of civil society organizations that were working on human rights to now working on the softer issues that will not have them in direct confrontation with the government. Hence, we have a few organizations that have been left now in the human rights defending space, and the organizations that are able to hold the government accountable. But also those organizations have really been dealt a big blow in terms of, donor focus in the case of Swaziland to more softer issues because of the fact that the government has directly accused them of sponsoring terrorism, because defending human rights in Swaziland has been directly equated to terrorism by the government, as it were. So I think in a nutshell, that is what I can share from the civil society perspective in Swaziland. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. We really appreciate that input. I think finally for our inputs, I'm going to call, I would like to ask my colleague Munjodzi Mutandiri to provide a few minutes of some regional analysis of the issue, if you're available to come in, Munjodzi.
Yeah, thank you, Lily, and everyone else behind putting together this important discussion at a difficult time, I think, for the region, particularly with what we are seeing in Mozambique, but also having been an election year and coming from what we had seen in Zimbabwe in 2023 around what I think Pierce eloquently touched on. The hope that the region was moving in the right direction in terms of being able to call each other when processes have not gone according to plan, presents this point as a difficult point in terms of where we're going. I think that there's a lot of anxiety from the region, particularly from civil society and other practitioners in the civil society space, electoral practitioners, and again, ordinary citizens, that you get a sense that we keep regressing as a region in terms of advancing the tenets of democracy. And this presents not just the difficulties, but also a need for reflection among many of us in this space to really begin to think outside the box and what, in terms of what is it that we can be able to practically do to move the needle towards a more open and democratic region. And of course, the more we work together, the easier it becomes to really address these disturbing challenges. And I think that President Makanya and Comrade Thabo have put on the table what we have been hearing to be a very difficult situation. It's quite an intense situation that we have to look at it not only as a national crisis within Swaziland, but as a regional threat to peace and security. And you locate Swaziland in the context of a burning region, as I said earlier, particularly with the situation in Mozambique, where you see the SADC leadership really not putting on the table convincing or confident building plans of dealing with the situation of post-election crises. One read the SADC Extraordinary Summit communique with a lot of discomfort, because you could tell that the gathering really either they're out of their depth or there is no intention to deal with the real challenges that we are facing as a region, but to sort of shield each other, as we saw in Swaziland at the height of the massacre in 2021, where we thought that we had made some gains. SADC had been able to talk to the king. The king had committed to a clear plan of dialogue, not a plan, but a clear intention of having a dialogue that is genuine, that brings all stakeholders on the table. And we watched with trepidation the walk back by the king, slowly just diffusing tension, demobilizing civil society, until it got to a point where it became clear, as President Makanya put on the table, that there won't be a genuine dialogue. But these things will not just disappear. Citizens, as their economic woes increase, they will continue to want to find solutions to why they are in the situations they are in. So not addressing these challenges, in my opinion, presents quite a difficult moment for not just the region. Of course, some of these things we don't want to appear like we are exceptional and that the crises we face are only in this region. Some of these things are global. Authoritarianism is deepening, but those of us who are trying to advance a narrative that democracy, the respect for human rights are as important as the welfare and the economic prospects of the people. You have to, again, do more. There are three things that I think I want to highlight in terms of what could be done. Of course, the disturbing news we had from President Makanya is survival of assassination attempts and the killings we have been hearing in Swaziland, and the closure of spaces highlighted by Thabo, the introduction of the NGO bill, which would basically stop all activities by civil society. I think coordinated efforts at a regional level. We are not seeing this only in Swaziland. We are seeing them in Zimbabwe, in Malawi, and I think more countries will come to try to squeeze the space so that those civil society organizations that are operating in the democracy and governance space will have very difficulty conditions to operate in. In some cases, these laws are meant to actually ban anyone who is operating in this space. So we need to say, as a region, what can we do to ensure that the treaty, the SADC Treaty of 1992 is realized, it becomes a reality, not just to stay on paper and us thinking that we had intentions of achieving this. So the first thing that I think is quite important is to begin to talk about SADC's role as a regional guarantor of stability. And I think that we have to debate more. I heard President Makanya's points on how they've been treated every time they've been on the platforms to make submissions as people from Swaziland around the issues, and the fact that SADC do not see those that are not part of the state as important stakeholders in building stability and peace at a regional level is quite difficult. I think we have to find ways of how do we evolve or push for the evolution of this role that SADC plays in terms of peace and stability. Again, Mozambique comes to mind, that you see the situation developing and deteriorating every day. We will get to a point where we talk about Swaziland in the same realm. We talked about Swaziland in 2021 during the massacre in the same realm, and it seems we are not getting lessons. So the idea of violent crackdowns on peaceful protesters, the arrests, arbitrary arrests of civil society activists, And many other of these challenges we are seeing are quite difficult, and that role for SADC has to be what civil society begin to think about, not just civil society, but everyone who loves peace and democracy begin to think about how do we push for the evolution of SADC's role as the guarantor of peace and stability, and how can that role be beyond politicians, those that have state power determines what happens. How do we include the role of citizens across the region? So that's number one. The second one is the issue of protection of human rights defenders, as Thabo has been speaking on, and I think President Makhanya as well. We know for a fact that there's been a number of activists and ordinary citizens in Swaziland who have been crossing borders to seek for refuge in other countries. And in most cases, they have not been able to be met with systems that would provide with protection. We know that citizens, people solidarity works. In most cases, let's say it's in Mpumalanga, they've been able to be received by families that they have connections with. In Mozambique is the same. But this is an important aspect that we need to begin to think about in terms of how do we put regional mechanisms that provide immediate support and protection for people when they are on the run. And these numbers as well, a call for the comrades from Swaziland, is that we need to do more to document these cases and to be able to share these cases with comrades outside Swaziland, because I think it's critical that one, for history and for generations that will come, we mustn't lose touch of what authoritarians and dictators have done at a particular point in history. Because if history is to judge, it must judge them correctly, including their kins and kin that will come after them. So it's important to document the works of dictators and authoritarian leaders. So I think it's critical. We have clear numbers. Those that have been killed, we must have a portal where we are able to see what King Mswati has done during his reign. But more importantly, to be more proactive, thinking about what is it that we can be able to do to help the comrades inside, but those who decide to run for dear life so that they have another day to fight. The last point, Lily, is on regional solidarity, because I know that the comrades have covered the internal issues. I'm just trying to see from outside what is it that we need to intensify and think about more. We must begin to move beyond statements to concrete action. There was a point when we were at this level where we would march into Swaziland, join marches from to Manzini, or go to the border, be part of the blockages. Because I think that one of the things that I sort of am a bit worried about at a regional level is the isolation, that we are fighting our struggles in isolation a lot. And I think we must be deliberate in connecting people, connecting civil society organizations across the region, legal experts, human rights defenders from across the SADC region. We must begin to speak the same language that instability and insecurity in Swaziland has a bearing on what happens in our individual countries. Last year, we saw in Zimbabwe when one of the fundamental rights, the ability to vote, was threatened and ballots were not made available to people. Someone just wakes up and says, no, the ballots are finished, so we can't vote. We are seeing the same yesterday here in Namibia. things repeat themselves. We will see the same again in another country in a few years or in a few months. And so the idea that we connect our struggles and know that we fight common struggles at a regional level, I think is important to help us build momentum to push back against authoritarianism, against the idea that citizens are second-class citizens, they are first-class citizens, which is those that are in power. So this is important for me, for comrades from not just Swaziland, but also across the region. As we do this, we must be able to identify pressure points to push for the kind of a region and a society that we believe. The idea of dialogue in Swaziland, I think someone touched on the 5-point plan that was put immediately after the massacre. The idea of a dialogue, peaceful dialogue that involves all stakeholders should not just be something that we look at it and discuss in meetings. We must be deliberate, using regional solidarity to push for that particular dialogue to happen. Whether it means bringing Swati to the table, screaming and crying, we must be able to build sufficient pressure to do that. Otherwise, we'll continue to move in circles of repression, loss of life, those in power polluting to protect each other and all that. I've talked for too much, Lily, but just to say that as we deliberate, let us really be very conscious that our regional stability depends on our collective commitment to democratic principles and the protection of human rights. And these are pure words, but in my opinion, if we don't become deliberate and really committed to this agenda of pushing step by step on a day-to-day basis, the region might continue to see flashpoints of chaos, war, and conflict that we are already seeing. So in conclusion, I think we need to strengthen regional civil society networks and even beyond, including other. There is no reason why legal experts across the region should come together, and where there are chances of putting in a legal case against an errant government in the region at any level, be it at the ICC and other platforms, the African mechanisms and norms that are there, testing them, whether they save us or they don't, but also maybe push for the comeback of the SADC tribunal, because it's important. Then on human rights, because we are seeing this more clearly coming back as a tool by dictators, we need to develop clear systems, warning systems, but also protection systems to ensure that human rights violations do not go unpunished, whether by individuals or by governments. Then we need to support inclusive dialogue processes that recognizes that all stakeholders have to be on the table, in particular on the situation in Swaziland. Thanks, Lily, and apologies for taking too much time. It's just an emotive issue, even though we should be sober when we discuss it. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that call to very urgent solidarity was very clear. So thank you very much for that input. So now what we are going to do is we're going to open up the discussion. If anyone who's been listening and attending would like to come in and give a very short input or ask a question, we'd like to ask you to keep your questions or input to under 2 minutes, if you can, please. But yeah, this is now an invitation to anyone who would like to participate. So I have already, so just to clarify, so you can either write in the chat, I'd like to come in, or you can ask your questions writing in the chat, or you can find the option to raise your hand, and you can find it, maybe you have to press more if you're on your phone, and then there's a heart-shaped button and it says reactions, and then under reactions, then there's an option to say raise hand if you're able to see that. If not, you can just write in the chat. And there's obviously a few people that I can recognize would maybe like to come in. And Sikelela Dlamini from Tukoswa would also like to ask them to give a few input, and I can see a hand from Comrade Barry Mitchell from Nehau. So can we? Yeah, I'm going to take those two first. So I'm first going to go to Barry Mitchell, and then we're going to go to Sikelela Dlamini. And then, yes, feel free to raise your hand, ask some questions, and then we're going to go back to some of our panelists soon after. So, so over to you, Barry. Okay, we've done unmuting. Great.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon or good morning, comrades. No, mine is just a quick input, Chair, and thank you very much for this platform. And greetings to Comrade President. Sorry, my name is Barry Mitchell from Nahau. I'm also a Central Committee member of the SACP. Good to see that the President is in good health. Very glad to see that. I just need clarity on one and then an input on another. There's an interchanging use of referring to Swaziland as Eswatini. From our perspective, we saw this change in name from Swaziland to Eswatini as a PR stunt by Mswati to try and almost like Africanize the name of the country to mitigate some of the popular uprisings that were taking place, similar to what the Turkish president Erdogan did, renaming Turkey to Turkiye. So I just wanted clarity on that. I saw I heard comrades are using it interchangeably, and it might be semantics, but I think it's important. The second thing is appreciation from Pierce, the input that he gave, highlighting the regional geopolitical shifts. I just wanted to place it more on a broader spectrum, and locating the Swazi struggle within the context of the genocide that's happening in Gaza and Lebanon, the conflict in Ukraine, the formation of the Alliance of the Sahel States, and obviously the regional dynamics that I think Pierre spoke to. And then also, obviously, I think comrades, and I agree with all the sentiments and recommendations that have been put forward in terms of SADC, but locating why SADC has acted in such disgraceful behavior towards Swaziland and activists in Swaziland and civil society, perhaps by obviously pointing to the obvious that the US still maintains a military presence within the borders of Swaziland. So how to intensify the struggle as it is based on these conditions and contradictions, Chair, is to perhaps, and I agree, like I said, with all the recommendations that I've made, but to intensify these contradictions. South African government has taken Israel to the ICJ, a few days later met with Elon Musk. Another contradiction is that we have absolute monarchy within our boundaries. We have the most progressive constitution in the world, apparently. Yet we, as South African government and business interests, are propping up the monarchy. The investment arm of the ANC, and I know this is being publicly broadcasted, but the investment arm of the ANC has businesses within Swaziland. So another tactic that I wanted to recommend to the comrades is to highlight these contradictions, to highlight this doublespeak from the South African government and from SADC. And if it means naming and shaming these companies and so-called comrades that are operating businesses within Swaziland and propping up the monarchy, then so be it. So, Chair, I know that's, I think, over 2 minutes. I just wanted to make those initial remarks and really thank the platform, and really, really glad to see that the President is in such good spirits. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that input and that question, and I'm sure some of the comrades will be able to respond to that. Comrade Sikelela Dlamini, would you like to come in? I will allow unmuting settings. Yeah.
Oh, excuse me. Good morning, comrades. Good morning, Lily, and thank you again for the opportunity. I am rightly introduced as General Dlamini, the second DSG of Tukosa, but also doubles up as the Secretary General of the Swaziland Multi-Stakeholders Forum. Yeah, no, mine is quick. Comrade Makanye highlighted everything about the Swaziland question, and Comrade Thabo. But I just want to bring the aspects of the predicament that is also faced by organizations that will otherwise think they are not supposed to be getting some resistance against states. Resistance by states. The workers' movement. We know that workers are established creatures of law. They have various platforms in which they then deal with their issues as workers, such as the ILO. But I just want to highlight the fact that in 2021, the government issued out a directive, if I were to say, banning all public gatherings and processions. That is to say, even unions themselves, even though they are creatures of law. Now, what that clearly means is that as we're talking about collaboration, it is difficult to escalate the internal or national collaborations because the civic space has been closed for everyone. Whether you are a union or you are just a civil society organization or a political organization or just a community, it has been closed to everyone. That is why we find ourselves having difficulty even in attempting to address matters that are purely originating from the workers' space. So that is how far the government has gone. And as a result, even if issues are escalated at global fora such as the International Labour Organizations, for instance, the recently concluded one in June, we're able to bring up issues around the Swaziland question, the violation of human rights, highlighting particularly the arrests and the killing and torture of political activists. When we came back, the government was even threatening to pull out from the ILO. We do not know how they were going to do that, but they are still bitter about that. Because in their view, as workers, you are not supposed to talk about things that pertain human rights in the general sense. And that is very, very unfortunate. So I'm just making this brief contribution to highlight, to augment what other comrades have said. But the comrade Matinderi, I think he made a very good contribution to say our duty is to then escalate the collaborations in the SADC region. And that is where I think we are missing the point, because we tend to be too balkanized as civil society organizations. For instance, those who are engaged in worker rights, in women rights, they have little time dedicated to issues of the broader human rights violations in general. And whenever there are gatherings or conferences or debates and discussions by one sector, such as civil society sector, there has to be input that is begotten from the other sector, so that we are sure that whenever workers are, they are able to articulate issues with clarity, issues that are raised up in other fora which are not traditionally worker-related fora, such as broader human rights issues. So in that way, we will be able to forge ahead and to build the international solidarity that is so much desired, because I agree we need to move beyond the issuance of statements and all that we need to get to more practical and concrete solutions in terms of how we can resolve the Swaziland question and advance the democracy project in Swaziland. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that input. And sorry, I pressed the wrong button. And for yes, for drawing attention to the fact that workers' rights and human rights are one and the same, and we need to be pushing those connections. And yes, thank you for that perspective. I had initially seen a hand from Ambassador Welile Nhlapo. I'm not sure if you would still like to come in and give some input. Otherwise, I'm open to anyone who'd like to write in the chat if you'd like to come in, or raise your hand if you'd like to come in. So you're welcome to do that. But hopefully there'll be some input from Ambassador Nhlapo.
No, no, thank you very much. First, let me greet the president of Pudemo, and just to say to him, it's good to see him looking his good self. But in the same breath, I just want to remind him of a session that we had with the multi-stakeholder in Durban, about 2 years ago, where we're looking at the situation in Swaziland. And some of the issues that we raised there, not as part of the training that we are conducting and negotiations and whatever else that we're doing, but we got a number of questions that we posed, which clearly are pointing to some of the challenges that we have now in relation to Swaziland. The question of the elections, we raised it even then. There are elections coming. What is going to be the approach from the political party component of the multi-stakeholder forum? It was apparent and very clear then that there were divisions. So some of us were not surprised about what happened when some people decided to capitulate from the common position and cooperated. They were already by that time willing to go in that direction, some of them. The second one, we had made the observation that the SADC that we talk about today does not exist anymore. We are talking about the SADC of the past that emerged from the frontline states and the SADC that dropped 1C in Windhoek. That was the SADC. The one of today is something else, even in its expanded form. The islands that we've integrated, they are something on their own. I mean, they are surviving on their own because islands know nothing else but the surrounding, which is water. So other issues, they're not going to be very much enthusiastic about them. They've got climate issues and all sorts of things that they're focusing on. That's part of the SADC that we're talking about in the Eastern Coast. You talk about the ones in Central Africa, Angola, and the DRC. It's a different thing altogether. They are more focused on the internal issues and Central African issues because that's where they belong in terms of the OAU, AU regions. That's where they're focusing on. And you can see in the manner in which things are happening that at the end, when you are talking about SADC, We're actually talking about SACU and a few others. Samim was a good example of what I'm trying to drive at. Elections are very good, we need them. But they are producing monsters. Except Botswana, at least there's been an exception. But what has happened in the region, and I'm sure all of them, those ones who were sitting there taking whatever decisions they took in that summit, don't even know each other. They don't know each other. So you can't have a cohesive region that will act in tandem on the basis of a shared values and shared commitment to develop SADC into a genuine and real community. It's not going to happen unless we begin to address those issues and take up issues with what is happening in the region. It's not going to happen on its own. So all I'm pleading is that what we need to do, we need to start looking very seriously at what is happening in our region. In terms of what, even from the time, what we call political parties. Because we are entrusting the building of resilient and strong institutions that will promote democracy and the interest of the people with parties that are formed for wrong reasons. Self-serving, no values. So where are we going? We can't just be complacent and satisfied that we can be able to queue and vote, as Pierce was saying about democratic elections. It's fiction. So I think we need more discussion, deeper discussion about what this region is all about.
Noted. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that was a very strong call to all of us in the region, not just in Swaziland, to really start to take some action in solidarity. So thank you for that input. So colleagues, I think we're going to now close the discussion. So there's two more hands that I'm going to take, and then there's one question in the chat. And after that, we can't take any more inputs because I'm trying to be mindful of time here. And we'd also like to, so thank you. So we're going to go to our two next hands, and I'll read the questions in the chat before we go back to our speakers to allow them a chance to respond and to wrap up. So I'd very much like to urge the last two people who are going to give input to please keep it at 2 minutes. So yeah, we can start with Paul from Swalimo. You may come in for a 2 minute, and then I'll indicate to you when the time is up. Yeah, over to you. Paul, are you coming in?
Yeah, thank you so much, moderator. Can I first check if maybe I'm audible enough?
Yes.
Thank you so much. May I first introduce myself as Paul Matimela, the Acting Secretary General of the Swaziland Liberation Movement. I think it is very imperative to first forward my apologies for being late in such discussions. I think, however, one must mention that the cause of the delay is the backdoor that I used to join the meeting. It's one meeting that I wasn't aware of, which I believe it's one of the things that could be rectified maybe after these discussions. I would like to first acknowledge the presentations that was made by our president, the president of PUDEMO, which is a political formation that we are actually with in the revolution, in the mass democratic movement in Swaziland. I am from Swalimo, which is under the presidency of Duduzi Smelane, who is currently in exile in the UK. From one of the reasons that had been highlighted, especially on the continuation of the violations of the human rights in Swaziland. A number of the presentations that were made are very precise, and if I were to rate them, they are at the top shelf in terms of unpacking the political quagmire that we face in Swaziland. One that I want to do or want to ask here, it is just a request that this platform seems to be very, very impactful. However, I feel that those should be widened. To say that, comrades, there are many political formations in Swaziland, which I believe if they were to be invited in such a platform, as much as we share the same historical background in terms of the formation, we share the same experiences, but I think we have a different way at which we envisage the new dispensation. I think we have a different way at which we think we should be fighting for this revolution. So it is very important that we could be here sharing such a platform and be able to contribute meaningfully. And I think it can bring a proper guide to the House as we are moving forward. Another thing, comrades, one that must say, I've really heard a number of the speakers here talking about the issue of international solidarity, international community. One must say we strongly rely on that pillar, especially in our case. The situation is intensifying each and every day. The regime is increasing its grip each and every day, making the lives of the people in Swaziland very difficult. So we strongly believe as an organization, the Swaziland Liberation Movement, that there is a lot that we could gain. There is a lot that could be done by the international community, regionally, and other organizations that are there in the world to champion the interests of the people, especially the human rights. Comrades, when I joined here, I found the president of PUDEMO was elaborating on the removal of Swaziland from the Trocchia agenda, which is one thing that as an individual raised some questions as to who is actually SADC as an regional organization serving. Is that organization still serving the interest of the people? Is that organization still the organization that was formed, or it is another organization in a name of SADC, but that is in place to champion the interests of the dictators, that is championed to cushion the dirtiness of the leaders that we are currently having. Also, this comrade seeks to say, I'm one person who believes in the idea of one Africa. The situation that is taking place, or the events that are taking place, looking at Mozambique, a number of countries in Africa, it tells us that we need to shift, especially from trying to deal with these issues as a unit, focusing on what is happening in Swaziland, because the problem that we are facing are cut across Africa, which I strongly believe they are actually telling us, or they are actually giving us a signal of the existence of the secular colonialism, which I strongly believe is the one that is perpetrating the situation that we are facing, because a number of
I think we've lost Paul, but I think that's okay because it's been a bit over 5 minutes. So I want to ask Ma'am Miriam Swaratse to please come in.
Good morning, comrades, and thank you, Lily. Yeah, I just want to pick up on what Munjozi and others earlier said, and of course, greetings to all the speakers and the leaders gathered in this platform. Munjozi reflected on a need to strengthen the regional solidarity movement and work. I mean, and other comrades have reflected on a need for concrete activities that will step up from mere issuance of media statements on the situation in Swaziland and what is happening in the region, where there are disturbances like Mozambique and what is happening in Zimbabwe. And as Comrade Welile said, there's a lot happening in the region, and there's a need for in-depth analysis and what needs to be done. And part of the problem could be not just SADC, but also the political parties in the region. So it's a topic for another time. But I wanted to emphasize the issue that the leaders of political parties such as Pudemo and human rights activists in Mozambique and in Zimbabwe can come together and draw up this minimum program of regional solidarity. We have proposed it previously to say, work out on a regional program of action that can support civil rights movements and people who are fighting for justice in these countries. It can't happen on its own. And I mean, speaking from as a member of the ANC, I've often felt like it cannot just be ANC vocalizing or calling for changes in Swaziland and other countries. Would need a vocal regional voice that comes out, and not just voice, but all other formations, and also COSATU, SACP, all of us have to come up with a program that begins to assist the comrades in these countries. But also we should be prepared for a backlash that we are supporting the agenda of regime change. When, so remember, there's also that voice that says, if you support these comrades, if you support these human rights fighters, you are actually assisting partly the agenda of regime change. I'm just throwing all these things, but I'm saying there's a need for consolidation of a program. The leaders can come together, and SAILO and other organization can assist. Solidarity work is a very, what can I say? I don't want to say expensive, but it requires resources. Otherwise it becomes very difficult. Thank you. I mean, even the issue that was raised about presenting a similar kind of a legal case against the monarchy in Swaziland. Somebody made an example of what South Africa did in relation to Palestine. A similar case can be raised, but you know what? We're talking about things that will require teams to work on these things outside these kind of platforms and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, particularly for pointing out the technical nitty-gritty details of what does solidarity mean and how can we actualize that. So thank you. So I think I'm going to read the questions from the chat, and then I'm going to ask first Rebonetel to come in and give her responses and some closing wrapping ups. And then I'm going to ask President Mlungisi Makhanya to do the same. So the one question in the chat is from Mulalo Mpapuli, which is, I have 3 questions. What steps has the African Union taken in trying to mediate the current crisis in Eswatini? What are the proposed solutions to the crisis? And lastly, how can the international community, particularly in the region, can effectively support a peaceful resolution? So that is a question we've gotten from the chat. Rebone, are you available to come in? And let me allow unmuting. Thank you. And so, yeah, you're welcome to respond to the other input, and then this would also be your any parting shots.
All right, now I'll just speak on the input from the participants, and also just what Monjosi said. I think there is a need, and I mean, if you look at historically in South Africa, you had Zimbabwe Solidarity Forum, you had the Swaziland Solidarity Network, and the question is what has happened to those organizations that were coordinating, activists within the South African region, focusing on different countries. So I think they need to actually go to the drawing board and check. Yeah, I think that should be the first starting point, in terms of taking the solidarity coordination forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and we really appreciate that you've spoken with us today. Much appreciated. So we're going to hand over to President Mlungisi Makhanya. You're welcome to give a in-depth response, or anything else you'd like to add. Let's see if I've allowed you to unmute. Try now.
Thank you very much, Lily, and thank you very much to all comrades, Comrade Barry, Comrade Welile, Comrade Miriam, Comrade Paul, and all comrades. And thank you very much, Comrade Ribon. I will be very quick, comrade. Comrade Barry, I want you to know that every time I use the name Eswatini, it is with a degree of severe pain, because when the sudden name change was effected, we tried to challenge it, obviously using Comrade Tulane. But Swazi courts being Swazi courts, that matter was never enrolled. And we think that it is one of the grave injustices. And it is not much about the actual changing of the name, but it is the complete disregard and disdain for less down processes and procedures that ought to be followed that is clearly stated in our national laws if such a thing were to happen. But comrades, I want us to, maybe it may not be on this platform because we don't have time. I hope, Lily, one day we would have an opportunity to discuss what is Swaziland and its political system, and what does it represent, and what dangers does it pose in the region. For instance, Comrade Barry raises the very poignant issue that when we look at this issue of Swaziland, we must also look at it in the broader context. I mean, South Africa takes very progressive, decisive measures against Israel for its ongoing genocide on Gaza and destabilization broadly in the Middle East, including making sure that the embassy in Pretoria is shut down. What does Mswati do? He offers Israel an opportunity to reopen its embassy in Swaziland that was closed in 1994, clearly undercutting the attempts by progressive nations, including South Africa, but also the broader position of SADC in terms of supporting the struggles of the people of Palestine. It is the same conduct that it takes and posture that it takes with the Morocco issue when it comes to Western Sahara. There is a position on SADC on Western Sahara, but what does it do? It continues to undermine those positions. It's again the same posture that it takes when you look at the China issue, the one China principle that is observed, and its international consensus. Swaziland remains the only country in the region to maintain diplomatic relations with Taiwan. And it does all these things of destabilization deliberately. I know this might sound controversial, but it is true. And that's why I say in another platform, we can also want to look at what has been the role of Mswati and the Swazi state broadly in the major financing and propping up of parties such as the MKP in South Africa, which we are able to share with comrades the role that he played to make sure that, amongst other things, he undercuts the African National Congress because of its consistent progressive solidarity stance on Swaziland, but also the propping up generally of traditional authorities in the region and the continent to posture as the legitimate custodians of the people's aspirations against elected political representatives through democratic multi-party elections. So I agree with Ambassador Nhlapo that we need to take a serious look into the development of the region. I remember vividly, Ambassador Nhlapo, our discussion, and I commit here that one will be following up to see your availability to engage further on some of these issues. Now, there was a question in the inbox that says, what remains the proposed solution? As Pudemo, we firmly stand with the multi-stakeholder forum proposed 5-point plan as the most logical and rational way forward. That includes an all-inclusive national political dialogue. That will include even those formations that the king dislikes the most, which are proscribed under the Suppression of Terrorism Act, including Pudemo. But also we think that the role that the international community can play at the very least is to make sure that Swaziland is held accountable to the many international treaties that it is a signatory to, that it continues to violate with impunity, including the violation of its own national laws and its constitution. Lastly, I end by saying to Comrade Miriam, no, I agree, Comrade Miriam, that in fact, you had raised this suggestion and even promised that you will follow up bilaterally with myself, that we need to convene a meeting of progressive organizations in the region to look at how can we develop a minimum program of action. Now, and this is important because as Ambassador Nhlapo was reflecting, it's not all political formations that are established in the region and the continent that are about the people and are about progressive politics. I end by saying, you know, one of the things, comrade, that is a worrying trend now is that these regimes, particularly in our region, seem to be sharing notes. When I wanted, for instance, to attend the SADC summit in Zimbabwe, I was alerted just before I left that I was on the watch list by the ZANU-PF government there to be arrested and possibly deported for Swaziland. So if you say to me, for instance, I must go to Mozambique, I will think twice. So what we're seeing in Kenya with what they did to Kasinje, it appears that it's something that is beginning to be prevalent in the region. And this is aimed at minimizing or limiting the international lobbying and mobilization space for solidarity if you make it risky and dangerous for those who oppose some of these repressive regimes to travel into some of these countries in the region. But once again, Lily, thank you very much for the opportunity, and we look forward to engage on all topics, not just on Swaziland, because we think that our interest and future is intertwined in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and you're absolutely right about that. Yeah, we really appreciate your input, and I think it's been important, and we've all learned a lot. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Mikateko Palane, who's going to provide us with some closing remarks from Salo. And from my side, I'm very grateful to the speakers and to those who've given input, and I think it's been an important, formative, and continuation of a process of building greater solidarity. So thank you, and over to you, Mikateko. Let's see if we can allow you to unmute. No.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Now, on behalf of SAILO colleagues, would like to thank all the speakers and everyone who has attended and contributed to this discussion. And of course, engagement with this kind of informative sessions is vital with the people of Swaziland and SADC at large. It is, of course, very refreshing to hear from different colleagues with extensive background of what is happening in Swaziland and the solutions that are provided by each of us to make sure that Swaziland eventually gets the freedom that it deserves. And lastly, colleagues, I would like to thank our development partners, the Norwegian People's Aid, for continuing giving us support to make sure that our solidarity work continues and bears positive results in the work that we are doing across the SADC region. I thank you and goodbye, colleagues.
Thank you. Goodbye.